The train lurched as Zara Jenkins fumbled with her overstuffed backpack, nearly toppling into the lap of the man who had the misfortune of occupying the seat next to hers. "Sorry," she mumbled, not really meaning it. She was running late, exhausted, and frankly, out of patience with the world in general, especially with men. "No problem," came the deep, warm voice beside her. Zara barely glanced his way as she settled into her seat, determined to maintain the invisible wall she'd constructed between herself and the male population over the last 8 months. 8 months, 2 weeks and 3 days, to be precise, not that she was counting. That was when Daniel had walked out, taking with him her trust, her vintage record collection, and apparently her ability to believe in love. The cross-country train from Chicago to San Francisco would take nearly 2 days of forced proximity to a stranger she had no interest in getting to know. Zara pulled out her dog-eared copy of Women Who Run with Wolves and positioned it strategically between them like a literary barrier. "Interesting choice," the man commented. "I read that last year, changed my perspective on a few things." Zara looked up, momentarily startled. The man beside her wasn't what she expected. He wore a simple navy sweater that looked casually expensive and jeans that had definitely never seen the inside of a discount store. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and his eyes, a startling shade of amber, were studying her with genuine interest. "Xander Sinclair," he said, extending a hand. "I promise I won't talk your ear off the entire journey." "Zara," she replied, briefly shaking his hand before returning to her book, "and thanks for that." What Zara didn't know as she attempted to lose herself in familiar pages was that Xander Sinclair wasn't just any passenger. The man sitting next to her owned the very train they were riding on, along with the entire railway company and a dozen other businesses spanning 3 continents. Forbes had recently listed him among the top 30 billionaires under 40, though Xander had successfully kept his face relatively unknown to the public through careful media management. He was on this train not out of necessity, but as part of his annual ritual of experiencing his businesses from the ground level, something his executive team thought was eccentric, but that he considered essential. What he hadn't counted on was meeting someone who looked at him with absolutely zero recognition or interest, and finding that refreshingly intriguing. The first 3 hours passed in relative silence. Zara read her book, occasionally making notes in the margins. Xander alternated between checking emails on his phone and gazing out the window at the passing landscape, stealing glances at the woman beside him when he thought she wouldn't notice. It was during a particularly sharp turn that disaster struck. The train tilted, sending Zara's open water bottle cascading directly into her lap and splashing onto Xander's expensive leather messenger bag. "Damn it!" Zara scrambled for napkins from her bag. "I'm so sorry about your bag." "Don't worry about it," Xander said, quickly moving his bag to safety. "It's just water." Zara looked down at her soaked jeans and groaned. "Great. Now I get to be uncomfortable for the next 40 hours. You don't have anything to change into?" "My suitcase is checked. I only have this backpack with me, and trust me, there's no room for extra clothes in there." Xander hesitated for just a moment before reaching up to the overhead compartment. "I might be able to help with that." He pulled down a sleek carry-on and unzipped it, revealing meticulously folded clothing. He extracted a pair of black sweatpants and offered them to her. "They'll be too big, but they're clean and they're dry." Zara stared at the offered sweatpants, suspicion warring with practicality. "I can't take your clothes. Consider it a loan, unless you'd prefer sitting in wet jeans for 2 days. She reluctantly accepted them. "Fine, thank you." When she returned from the bathroom wearing his sweatpants rolled several times at the waist and ankles, Xander couldn't help but smile. She looked simultaneously ridiculous and adorable. "Not a word," Zara warned, sitting back down. "Wouldn't dream of it," he replied, but his eyes were laughing. As the train rumbled through the Midwest, the ice between them began to thaw. It started with a shared eye roll over the overly enthusiastic train attendant, followed by the mutual discovery that they both had an affinity for the chocolate chip cookies being served in the dining car. "These are surprisingly good," Xander commented, taking another bite. "The secret is brown butter," Zara replied automatically. "My grandmother was a baker. She taught me that the difference between a good cookie and an amazing one is about 30 seconds of extra cooking time for the butter." "You bake," Zara shrugged. "Used to, I haven't in a while." "Why not?" My ex hated the mess. She paused, surprised at herself for volunteering that information. "Anyway, it's hard to bake in a tiny apartment kitchen." Xander nodded, filing away this piece of information. "That's a shame. Some of the best things in life come from a little mess." "Spoken like someone who's never had to clean up after themselves," Zara quipped. He laughed, a genuine sound that caught her off guard. "Fair point. Though you'd be surprised." The conversation flowed more freely after that. Zara learned that Xander worked in transportation, a deliberate understatement on his part. He told her stories about growing up with his grandfather in Montana, learning to fly fish and repair old trucks. She shared tales from her job as an art conservator at a small museum in Chicago, a position she'd recently left to take a prestigious new role at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. "I've always been fascinated by conservation," Xander said. "The patience it must take to restore something to its original beauty without destroying what makes it unique." "That's actually a really good way of putting it," Zara admitted, looking at him with new interest. "Most people think it's boring or just about cleaning old paintings." "Nothing that preserves beauty could ever be boring," he replied, his eyes meeting hers. The train entered a tunnel, and the sudden darkness seemed to intensify the moment between them. When light returned, Zara quickly looked away, reminding herself of the promise she'd made after Daniel. No more relationships, no more disappointments, no more men who seemed perfect only to reveal their true selves once you were already invested. Night fell and the dining car began serving dinner. Without discussing it, they naturally went together, continuing their conversation over surprisingly decent train food. "So what's in San Francisco?" Xander asked, twirling pasta on his fork. "Besides the new job, a fresh start," Zara replied. "Chicago has too many memories." "Bad breakup," she hesitated. "You could say that. 8 months ago, I came home to find half my apartment empty and a note saying he'd found himself with my yoga instructor." Xander winced. "Ouch." "Yeah. 4 years together, and apparently it took him about 4 minutes to decide to leave." She took a sip of wine. "The worst part wasn't even the betrayal, it was realizing that I'd completely lost myself in that relationship. I'd stopped painting, stopped baking, stopped doing all the things I loved because they didn't fit into his idea of what our life should be. And now I'm done with love. Completely done. I'm focusing on my career, on rediscovering my passions. Men are officially off the menu." Xander nodded, trying to ignore the twinge of disappointment her declaration caused. "That's understandable. What about you?" she asked. "Why are you on this train when you could probably afford to fly?" The question caught him off guard. For a moment, he considered telling her the truth, but something held him back. "Not yet. I like trains," he said simply. "They give you time to think, to watch the world go by. There's something honest about them." Zara studied him. "That's surprisingly poetic for a guy who looks like he stepped out of a business magazine." He laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." Back in their seats, the night grew deeper. Most passengers had reclined their seats and were attempting to sleep. Zara found herself fighting to keep her eyes open. "You can use my shoulder," Xander offered, noticing her nodding off. "I've been told I make a decent pillow." "I'm sure you have," she mumbled, but she was too tired to resist. Within minutes, her head had dropped onto his shoulder, and her breathing had deepened. Xander remained perfectly still, savoring the unexpected closeness. He couldn't remember the last time someone had fallen asleep beside him without knowing who he was, without wanting anything from him. It felt strangely intimate, and real in a way his relationships rarely did. Morning came with golden light streaming through the windows, and Zara waking to discover she'd not only used Xander's shoulder as a pillow, but had somehow ended up with his arm around her. She jerked upright, embarrassed. "Sorry," she mumbled, smoothing her hair. "I didn't mind," he said quietly. Their second day on the train developed a rhythm. They took meals together, shared stories, and gradually, Zara found herself letting down her guard. There was something about Xander that felt safe, despite her best intentions to remain detached. "What's the first thing you'll do in San Francisco?" he asked as they shared coffee in the observation car, watching mountains replace the endless plains. "Find a decent apartment, I guess. The museum is putting me up temporarily, but I need my own space." "I might know some places," Xander offered carefully. "I have a few connections in real estate there." "Of course you do," Zara teased. "Let me guess, you have connections everywhere," he smiled enigmatically. "Not everywhere. Just the important places." As the train wound through the mountains, Xander received a call that he took privately between cars. When he returned, Zara noticed a subtle shift in his demeanor. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Work stuff," he replied. "Nothing that can't wait until San Francisco." "Ah, the mysterious transportation business calls," she said lightly. "You know, for someone who talks a lot, you haven't actually told me what you do." Xander hesitated. The moment had come sooner than he'd expected. "I own a few companies," she repeated. "That's deliberately vague." "Would it change things between us if I told you exactly what I do?" Zara considered this. "I don't know, would it?" "I'd rather just be Xander for a little longer," he admitted. "The guy you met on a train, not the rest of it." She studied him, curiosity piqued. "Now you've made it sound ominous. Are you some kind of criminal?" he laughed. "Nothing that exciting, I promise." That evening, as the train made a brief stop in Reno, they decided to stretch their legs on the platform. The night air was cool and refreshing after the recycled air of the train. "We'll be in San Francisco tomorrow," Xander said, his voice tinged with something Zara couldn't quite identify. "Back to real life," she nodded. "No more train bubble." "It doesn't have to end," he said suddenly, turning to face her. "I know we just met, but I'd like to see you again in San Francisco." Zara felt her carefully constructed walls trembling. "Xander, I told you, I'm not looking for, I know what you said," he interrupted gently, "and I respect that. But I also think there's something here worth exploring, even if it's just friendship." She looked up at him, at this man she'd known for barely 36 hours who somehow felt like an old friend. "I don't do casual either. I'm not asking for casual, I'm asking for a chance." The boarding call interrupted them, and they returned to the train in thoughtful silence. That night, sleep eluded Zara. She was acutely aware of Xander beside her, his breathing steady, occasionally catching when he shifted in his sleep. She'd sworn off relationships, had built her new life around that promise to herself. And yet, here she was, contemplating breaking that vow for a man she'd met on a train, a man who was still partially a mystery to her. Morning broke with the announcement that they would arrive in San Francisco in 3 hours. The atmosphere between them had changed, charged with unspoken questions and possibilities. "I need to tell you something," Xander said as they shared a final breakfast in the dining car. "About what I do." Zara braced herself. "Okay. I own Transcontinental Railway." She blinked, waiting for the punchline. When none came, she laughed nervously. "You're joking, right?" "No, I also own Sinclair Airlines, Sinclair Shipping, and a few other transportation companies." He looked directly into her eyes. "I'm not just in transportation, Zara. I run one of the largest transportation conglomerates in the world." The realization hit her slowly, then all at once. You're Xander Sinclair, as in the Sinclair Group." Her mind raced back to a magazine article she'd skimmed months ago about the reclusive billionaire who had transformed his grandfather's failing railroad company into a global empire. He nodded, watching her carefully. "I am." "Why didn't you tell me? Would it have made a difference?" Would you have talked to me the way you did if you'd known? Zara considered this. Probably not, she admitted, but that should have been my choice to make. You're right, he said softly. I apologize for that. It's just refreshing to meet someone who sees me, not my bank account. She shook her head, trying to process this new information. So this whole train journey, I do it once a year. Experience the services as a customer, see what needs improving. He leaned forward. Meeting you wasn't planned, Zara, but it's the best thing that's happened to me in a long time. She stood abruptly. I need some air. Zara made her way to the space between cars, where she could feel the rush of wind through the small windows. A billionaire. She'd spent 2 days sharing stories, meals, and surprisingly personal confidences with a billionaire who owned the very train they were riding on. It felt like something out of a movie, not her actual life. Xander found her there 20 minutes later. I understand if you're angry, he said. I'm not angry, she replied, still looking out the window. I'm recalibrating. What can I do to help? She turned to face him. Be honest with me, no more half-truths or omissions if we're going to. Whatever this is, I need complete honesty. You're considering a whatever this is. He asked, hope evident in his voice. I'm considering not completely ruling it out, she clarified. Which is already more than I planned to do when I got on this train, he smiled. I'll take it. As the train approached San Francisco, they exchanged phone numbers. The ease of their train companionship had been replaced by a slightly awkward awareness of the real world waiting for them. My driver will be meeting me, Xander said as they gathered their belongings. Let me give you a ride to your hotel. I think I need to find my own way, Zara replied. Process everything. He nodded, understanding but visibly disappointed. Call me when you're ready, or if you need help finding that apartment. The train pulled into the station, and reality crashed in with the announcements and bustle of passengers preparing to disembark. They stepped onto the platform together, and for a moment they just stood there, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Thank you for making this journey memorable, Xander said finally. Thank you for the sweatpants, Zara replied, producing a small smile. They parted ways, Xander toward a waiting black car with a driver, Zara toward the taxi stand. As she waited in line, she felt a strange sense of loss, as if something important was slipping through her fingers. 3 days later, Zara was settling into her temporary housing, a sterile corporate apartment that felt nothing like home. Her new job was challenging and exactly what she'd hoped for professionally, but she found herself thinking about Xander constantly. She'd looked him up, of course. The articles painted a picture of a brilliant business mind, a generous philanthropist, and a notoriously private person. There were few photos and even fewer personal details. The man she'd met on the train, the one who'd quoted poetry and listened intently to her stories about art restoration, was nowhere to be found in those stories. On her 5th night in San Francisco, her phone rang with an unknown number. Hello, Zara, it's Xander. I hope it's okay that I'm calling, her heart skipped. It's okay. I've been respecting your space, but I wanted to check if you found an apartment yet. Not yet. Everything is either out of my price range or the size of a closet. I might have a solution, he said carefully. No strings attached. There's a building in North Beach owned by one of my companies. It has a vacancy and I can get you a good rate. Zara hesitated. I don't know, Xander. Just look at it. If you don't like it, no hard feelings. And the discount would be the same one. All employees of my companies get nothing special. Against her better judgment, she agreed to see the apartment the next day. The building was a renovated Victorian with a view of the bay. The apartment itself was perfect, spacious, filled with natural light, with a kitchen that practically begged for someone to bake in it. This is... Wow, Zara breathed, taking it all in. So you like it? Xander asked, watching her reaction carefully. I love it. But there's no way I can afford this, employee discount or not. The previous tenant was a curator at the Modern Art Museum too, he said. We have a special rate for arts professionals. Part of my grandfather's legacy, he believed in supporting the arts. Zara narrowed her eyes suspiciously. That's convenient. It's true, he insisted. Check with your colleagues if you don't believe me. She did, and discovered that indeed, several museum employees lived in buildings owned by the Sinclair Group at reduced rates. It was a well-established program that predated Xander's leadership. Zara signed the lease the following week. She told herself it was because the apartment was perfect and the price was right, not because it put her in closer proximity to Xander. Over the next month, they established a cautious friendship. Coffee after she finished work. Occasional dinners where they discussed art and business and everything in between. Xander showed her his favorite spots in the city, places tourists never found. Zara introduced him to the joy of street food and farmers' markets. Gradually, Zara felt her resolve weakening. Xander was unlike anyone she'd ever met, thoughtful, intelligent, and surprisingly down-to-earth despite his wealth. He listened when she spoke, remembered the details, and never made her feel less than his equal. 2 months after their train journey, Xander invited her to dinner at his home, a stunning modernist structure perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. "This is where you live?" Zara asked, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist decor. "Most of the time," he admitted. "Though it doesn't always feel like home." He cooked for her himself a simple but perfect pasta dish that he claimed his Italian grandmother had taught him to make. "I didn't know billionaires could cook," Zara teased as they ate on the terrace, the sunset painting the sky in dramatic oranges and pinks. "There's a lot you still don't know about me," he replied with a smile. "I'm hoping you'll stick around long enough to find out." After dinner, they walked along his private beach, shoes off, the cool sand between their toes. The moment felt perfect, timeless. "Zara," Xander said, stopping to face her, "I need to tell you something." She tensed, bracing for bad news. "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words were simple, direct. "I've been falling since that first day on the train when you nearly dumped water all over my bag and didn't even care who I was." Zara felt her carefully constructed defenses crumbling. "Xander, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I know you're not ready, I know you've been hurt, I just wanted you to know where I stand." She looked up at him, this man who had somehow worked his way past all her barriers. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of you but of this, of feeling this way again." He took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "We can go as slow as you need." "What if it doesn't work out? What if I'm not cut out for your world?" "My world is wherever you are," he said simply. "The rest is just details." Under the stars, with the sound of the ocean as their soundtrack, Zara made a decision. She rose on her tiptoes and kissed him, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened into something more. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she smiled up at him. "I think I might be falling too." 6 months later, Zara's apartment was sitting empty, her belongings now integrated into Xander's home. She'd transformed one of his unused rooms into a studio where she painted on weekends, and the kitchen regularly filled with the smell of freshly baked cookies. They still took the train sometimes, booking the same seats where they'd first met. Xander had implemented several improvements to the service based on their original journey, and employees now jokingly referred to it as the Love Train. On their 1-year anniversary, they retraced their original route from Chicago to San Francisco. In the same seat where Zara had first reluctantly acknowledged his existence, Xander dropped to one knee. "When I boarded this train a year ago, I was just going through the motions," he said, holding her hands in his. "Then you literally stumbled into my life, completely unimpressed by me, and everything changed. You showed me what it means to be seen for who I really am, not what I own or what I've built." Tears welled in Zara's eyes as he continued. "I know you were done with love when we met. I'm so grateful you made an exception for me." He produced a ring not ostentatious, but vintage and clearly chosen with her artistic sensibilities in mind. "Zara Jenkins, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes." They married the following spring in a ceremony that balanced Xander's wealth with Zara's artistic sensibility, intimate, despite the high-profile guest list. Meaningful despite the extravagant setting. 2 years later, they welcomed twins, a boy and a girl, who inherited their father's amber eyes and their mother's artistic temperament. "I never thought I'd have this," Zara admitted one night as they stood watching their children sleep. "After Daniel, I was so sure I was done with love forever." Xander wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I'm glad you were wrong. Me too," she whispered, leaning back into his embrace. "Though I'm still not giving you back those sweatpants," he laughed softly. "Keep them, they look better on you anyway." As they made their way back to their bedroom, Zara marveled at how completely her life had transformed. From the woman who had boarded that train determined never to love again to a wife, mother, and still very much her own person and artist who had found her voice and her heart at the same time. Sometimes the universe had other plans, she reflected. Sometimes those plans involved a chance meeting on a train with a billionaire who saw beyond her walls to the person she truly was and loved her not despite her past hurts, but because of the strength they had given her. And sometimes, just sometimes, being wrong about love was the best thing that could ever happen to a person.